My name's Gail Cartmail. I'd be nice to take over because we can't hear our chair, Mary Robertson from the TUC, and she's obviously trying to sort out the technical difficulties. So I'm going to do this from scratch, not having really prepared. So Mary, if you do get sound, please rescue me. So welcome everybody. We've got, with all due modesty, a fantastic panel. We have Christina McAnea from UNISON. We have Mark Serwotka from PCS, Rehana Azam from the GMB, and Rachel Reeves, who, as we all know, is a front bench member of the Shadow Cabinet. It's a pleasure to have everybody on the panel. My name, I think I've said, is Gail Cartmail, and I'm from the Trade Union Unite. I am a panellist as well, so you may hear from me again in a moment. We're here to celebrate, of course, the Tolpuddle Martyrs, but we're here to celebrate public services.
Yeah. So let me introduce
Christina McAnea. Christina, you're most welcome.
3.
Hi, I'm Christina McAnea. I'm Assistant General Secretary for UNISON, in charge of the negotiations, bargaining and equalities. Are you hearing this? Yeah? Yeah. Okay, so great to be here. I'm really sorry not to be in Tolpuddle in person, and because I'm looking out of a window here and it's raining and miserable. Perfect festival weather, so sorry not to be with, that we can't all be together and enjoy the music and the poetry and the spoken word and all the fantastic things that happen at Tolpuddle. But this is a really important session to talk about what's happened in public services before and indeed after COVID. So if this pandemic has done anything, it's shown how important public sector workers are. The true value of what public sector workers do, as we know, isn't reflected in the pay they receive. It's not set by how qualified or well trained they are. When you think of what happened during the pandemic, we all know that doctors, nurses and a whole range of clinical staff were clearly at the front line of dealing with it in the NHS context. But so too were the porters, the healthcare assistants, the cleaning, the catering staff, the laundry staff, the specialist cleaning staff who keep the equipment sterile, the IT people who keep the systems running, the admin staff. All of them had a huge part to play in how the NHS responded, and that's replicated across the public sector. So, you know, if you think about schools, teaching assistants, nursery nurses, bus drivers, a whole range of people across the public sector. And I know my colleagues will talk about their own members and their contribution in this. And in UNISON, just to give you a flavour of where we were, so most of our members continued to work, whether that was in local government or in the NHS or in social care or in a whole range of other sectors. But at one point at the height of the pandemic, about 90% of the calls and emails we were getting were coming from our members who work in social care. That's how bad it was. Harrowing, heartbreaking calls and emails from people who were worried about the lack of PPE, worried about the impact of them on them and their families, but incredibly worried about the impact this would have on the people they were looking after. And terribly worried, and this continues today, terribly worried about what would happen if they or one of their family members became ill and they had to go off sick and rely solely on statutory sick pay and what impact that would have on them. Workers who before the pandemic were called low skilled, but we know now, or we knew then as well, were anything but low skilled. And we know that being low paid and even being low valued by society doesn't by any stretch of the imagination mean that you're low skilled. And it's our job in the trade union movement to make sure that this isn't forgotten, that the contribution, indeed the sacrifices that people have made are not forgotten. Because if you look at what's happened, and I'll just use the care sector again, social care workers are twice as likely to die as they would be in a similar cohort in the population. So there's something going on in some of these public sectors, the lack of PPE, the lack of support, which makes it more likely that people there will die or be seriously affected by the pandemic. And even today, if you look at what's happening, the government announced additional powers for local authorities. But we know what this actually means. They're giving local authorities powers, but no money goes with it. So who will pay the price of that? It will be the public sector workers who work in local government. So we're demanding in UNISON, and I'm sure other organisations are, we're demanding a public inquiry into how this government has handled the pandemic. But that's a long-term thing. We know how long some of these things can take just to be set up and to take evidence. What we need to see are some short-term measures, especially as we think might be happening, we go into a second wave. One that actually sees public sector workers valued and rewarded. We need to see some decent pay awards coming up this year and next year for public sector workers. No suggestion that they will be the ones that will pay the price if the country goes into an economic recession as is expected. I mean, one option, why not bring forward every public sector pay award by 3-6 months and make sure that people realise we're doing this to value the work that they've done over the past 3-6 months. Make sure that this contribution and the sacrifices aren't forgotten. In some sectors, set up, demanding that the government do things like set up genuine tripartite partnership working, especially in those sectors that currently don't have it. So again, look at social care, totally fragmented, nothing happens there. You know, even the government ministers, I think, have been shocked at how difficult it is to implement any change or any policies in that sector. So let's look at doing something which actually brings things together for the workforce from the bottom up, where we look at the standards that are needed, the training that needs to go with it, and the pay that should be linked to that. This is not rocket science. We've done this in other sectors. We can do it in these sectors. End the appalling waste. So again, one of the things we want to see after COVID, end the appalling waste that comes from the whole range of outsourcing and all the sort of regulations that go with that in some of our essential services. Why are we spending time and money outsourcing them? And where savings exist in those services, in most of them they don't, but where they do, it comes from the workers and the attack on workers' pay and conditions. So let's, if we see something coming out of this, get rid of all of that structure that goes with it. What's clear is there can be no going back to business as usual. And one of the other key things we need to see out of this is a proper investigation into why so many black staff were affected, black workers and the black community affected by the pandemic. Now, we know that some of the reasons for that, you know, that they're more likely to be in low-paid jobs, they're more likely to be in frontline jobs, which exposes them. They're less likely to raise issues in the workplace because of what they think will be the impact on them. But there needs to be a proper inquiry into that, a proper procedure set up to make sure this is never replicated. It was a shocking indictment of what goes on in our country when we saw the impact on black staff. So there's a whole range of issues that we could be doing and taking forward. The key is no going back to business as usual. We have to build on the value and the contribution that public sector workers have made and make sure it's never forgotten by this government or indeed any other government going forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Christina. Can I check if everyone can hear me now? Excellent. All right. So sorry for the technical glitches at the beginning, and huge thanks to Gail for stepping in at short notice. Welcome everybody who's just joined us for this session on valuing public sector workers after the crisis. We're talking about how we repay public sector workers for all their sacrifices, huge dedication, hard work and humanity they've shown over the last 5 months, and also talking about what we can do what we as the labour movement need to do to make sure that ministers don't go back on their promises to turn those claps into proper appreciation in the long term. Our next speaker, so we've just heard from Christina McAnea, the Assistant General Secretary at UNISON. We've now got Gail Cartmail, who's just Assistant General Secretary at Unite the Union. Gail is Unite's, as well as being an excellent emergency chair, is Unite's strategic lead for a number of sectors, including construction, finance and legal, energy and utilities, public services, and community, youth and not-for-profit. So over to you, Gail. Thanks very much.
And thanks very much. And I think it's still morning. Good morning, everybody. Such a pleasure to be on this panel with such strong women and our, how can I say, adopted sister Mark. So just to start, 2 lessons from the pandemic. Lesson number 1, there is no such thing as too much public service. I haven't met anybody that thinks there's too much public service. So I start with that. And the second is the stuff that Christina touched on, which is all about values. Obviously valuing the services, the National Health Service, social care, refuse service, but also transport. My union believes, as a transport union, that we should have publicly funded, publicly provided transport system, but also those things that did have to close, libraries and leisure and recreation centres, to name but a couple, absolutely critical to community cohesion, but also to mental health. And of course, the value we place on key workers, which Christina so eloquently spoke about. So from our perspective, well, my perspective, 3 priorities. First, I think to build on the public appreciation of public service workers and public services. I think you'd have to have had a heart of stone not to have been moved by those moments every Thursday where we left our homes to stand with our communities and celebrate the value of public workers and key workers. Secondly, we need to prepare for austerity, and I'm afraid that will include pay freezes or pay constraints for those workers who have served us so well. And thirdly, I think the best commitment we could make today is to commit to organising. And I just want briefly, if I may, to focus on organising. So the survey that Unite conducted among our social care workers showed in the private sector, fragmentation, isolation of the worker who participated in the survey, and a complete lack of trade union organisation. Nobody was there with them to speak with them and for them. Now, the same issues that they cited, PPE, lack of testing and low pay, also came through from those adult social care workers in unionised environments, for example, in housing associations where social care workers support independent living. But the difference was that those respondents had the ability to challenge because they were organised. And we invited them to take up a trade union role, and many responded positively. So what we've proved over the pandemic is that trade unions are a force for good. We promote safety and enforce safety. We promote job security. And we did a huge amount to whip this government into shape to protect workers via furlough. But as Christina said, public sector work, public services and public sector workers are undervalued. I would suggest that's because the majority are women and disproportionately numerous are Black, Asian and ethnic minority workers who both historically suffer discrimination. Wherever women are dominant in a job role, we can guarantee it will be low paid or lower paid. So in public services, we've set about tackling some of the pay inequalities. So for example, all the unions, UNISON, GMB and Unite have campaigned in local government and challenged equal pay. We've talked about the skills that are typically attributed to women. It's what we do anyway. Obviously, we look after people and care for people. So why should that be a skill? But even where you have people in postgraduate roles, they're lesser paid on occasion. So the Enderby case that my union ran for speech and language therapists was about a glass ceiling. Their pay spine was compared to a male-dominated occupation lower. We won that, and we got an equality-proof pay system in its place. But inequalities creep in and are insidious. What? Oh, somebody's got a dog or an alarm. I'll carry on. During Tolpuddle, it's a time to remember, isn't it, our movement's history. And we remember that in 1834, those who were martyred subsequently did form a trade union. Now, the majority of service workers in the public services, as I've said, and the majority of users are women. So in conclusion, today I'd like not only to reflect on his story, but to reflect on her story. So let's start. 1888, the Brian and May women match workers, 4 and 1, better working conditions. And they then went on to advise dock workers that formed modern day trade unionism in this country. It was the women that taught the men. 1910, the women chain makers of Cradley Heath, home workers who dared to organise and won better pay. And over a 10-year period, they grew the National Federation of Women Workers from a membership of 2,000 to 20,000. And then the Ford machinists, their actions led to the establishment of the Equal Pay Act. The poster behind me on my wall says, "Prepare your daughter for working life, give her less pocket money than a man." That actually was from the Equal Opportunities Commission several decades ago, and we still have a gender pay gap and job segregation, which is actually dominant in public services. So I think we should celebrate today. I think we should celebrate public service workers and public services, but I think we should also prepare to resist and challenge the inherently sexist values that designate care workers unskilled, and challenge the rampant privatisation that puts profit before people and thrives on institutional inequalities. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Gail. Can I just remind people that once our panellists have finished their introductory words, we will be having a Q&A. So if you'd like to ask a question, please post in the Q&A box if you are watching on Zoom, and it's the Q&A box, not the chat. If you're watching on Facebook, then please leave questions in the comments below. Thanks. And next we've got Mark Serwotka, who's the General Secretary of the Public and Commercial Services Union. Over to you, Mark.
Well, thanks very much, Mary, and greetings to everybody who's watching. 2 fantastic speeches. So I just want to carry on some of the themes that we've heard. In my union, the PCS, we're representing mainly civil servants and public sector workers, but we do have a considerable presence also on government contracts in the private sector. Majority of our members are women, and I entirely concur with the points that Gail made. I mean, we represent some of the people who are really the most forgotten about, but who have also acted heroically in this crisis. Our members in job centres, for example, had to administer a 20-fold increase in universal credit claims, 2.6 million, even though there's 50,000 less of them than there was in the last financial crisis. Our members in HMRC, majority women, have administered the job retention scheme. There are 50,000 of them less than there were in 2008, and 12,000 of them staggeringly are on the national minimum wage, a national scandal if ever there was one. We have members that's kept the prisons running, who've kept our transport systems safe, who have been at our borders and in our ports and in our airports, in our museums and galleries, and have kept the justice system running. Most of these are low paid, majority of them are women, and the majority of them are massively undervalued. And I want to tip my hat to all of them for the fantastic efforts they've made, as well as all our other colleagues across the whole of the public sector. I mean, I also want to say, I don't want to be controversial, but I think if ever the price of the failure for Labour to win the general election has been most easily seen, it's been in the catastrophic handling of this crisis by the government. I believe there are people who have died, sadly, who would not have died had we had a more competent government in place. And I agree with Christine, we need a public inquiry because people must be held to account, because frontline workers have lost their lives because they didn't have PPE, the crisis in our care homes, the going late into lockdown, and frankly, the confusion around every announcement, which I believe is deliberate, shifts the blame from government onto individuals and employers, and it is a scandal. We have needed so much better in a national crisis, and sadly we have not had it. And that's why I think that whilst we can talk about valuing public service after the pandemic, my union very much believes we are far from through this pandemic. We listen to the health advisors, we all know we're preparing for a second wave in the winter, and we've got to learn the lessons. And our frontline public sector workers need support, and they need it now. And I don't believe they will get that from this government unless we can force them to do more than clap on a Thursday. So my key messages are, where we've had strong trade unions, people have been better looked after than where we have no trade unions. And we have seen that by keeping people safe. We have seen that for providing for people when they've had a union to go to. So in my own union, the majority of people have worked from home because of a decisive intervention from the union at the beginning. But we have also had tens of thousands who have worked right the way throughout. And therefore, what I really want to say now is that if we want the true value that our members deserve to be forced for the government to show it, we will have to organise together, and we will have to be prepared to say what the government won't want to hear and be prepared to demand, not ask, but demand proper treatment. What does that look like? It must mean fair pay. I agree entirely with Christina. The government is clearly heading potentially for a pay freeze for public sector workers, but even before we get there, we've just had pay offers in the civil service that represent the 11th consecutive year of real terms pay cuts. We need justice on our pensions. People may not have seen it, but they sneaked an announcement out the last 2 days ago that actually is appalling if you look at it, because what they're saying is their illegality that they are now forced to put right by discriminating against public sector workers will be paid for by public sector workers themselves. They have lifted the suspension on their pension valuation, but they're going to redo it. In other words, they won't pay the price to put the illegality right. Scheme members. What an outrage that is. You know, the person who has broken the law will ask the victims of that breach to pay for their mistake. We have to get pensions justice. But you know, we also have to demand more resources. The public service has been starved of resource, and in a post-Brexit world, we need more public sector workers in our councils, health service, schools, civil service, right across the board. We need to invest in those jobs. And yet, at the moment, we have a government that is currently making nearly 3,000 staff in HMRC redundant because they're carrying through plans to close offices that they decided to go down 5 years ago. So what does that mean in finishing? It means that to get fair pay, pensions, and the resource we need to get people back working in-house, because here's a statistic for you, proportionately in the civil service, more workers died who were working for private contractors than public servants in the civil service, and overwhelmingly they were black staff. The cleaners, the caterers, the security guards, the people the government never takes any notice of, paying the ultimate price. They should be in-house, and they should be getting 100% sick pay, not £19.71 a day on statutory sick pay the government wants them to have. And so I want to finish with this message. You would think, wouldn't you, in this crisis, the government wouldn't go back to business as usual. But you know what? We are currently balloting 200 private sector workers in the Tate because they are threatening pay cuts, redundancies, and pension cuts. It's part of a crisis across the culture sector of underfunding that will see thousands of people suffer. So my message is we work together. If they're making all of us pay for their pensions illegality, the unions must work together to stand up for fair pensions. It should be the same on pay. But also, I'll leave you with this thought, that this government has retreated from our communities at a breathtaking speed. The post-war consensus that you needed high-skilled public sector jobs in every community, not just cities, not just in the southeast, has been broken. And the government has made promises in the last election to many seats that it's won, yet they are currently closing offices and making staff redundant in those very seats. So what I say is this, that in this pandemic, we've shown people can work from home, people can use technology, people are needed on the high street, and relocation of jobs from London cannot just be about Edinburgh, Manchester and Leeds, as important as they are. They must be about Preston, the Fylde Coast, Cornwall, the Highlands of Scotland. In other words, what we have to say is public sector workers are needed in every community, in every part of the UK. And one of the ways to stop this economic recession that looks like it's coming is to ensure that we have highly skilled public sector jobs in every part of the United Kingdom. That's a big ask. We know we deserve it. We know we're unlikely to get it. So pledging to organise and campaign together is the real way that our frontline members will really get what they deserve. And on behalf of my union, I want to pledge to work with all my colleagues on this panel to try to deliver that in what are going to be difficult months ahead. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. We'll go straight into our next speaker, who is Rehana Azam from the GMB. Rehana leads the GMB Public Services section, which means she's leading local government pay bargaining and has been coordinating the GMB's industrial response to COVID-19. And she's also one of the trade union movement's most senior BME women. So over to you, Rehana.
Thank you, Mary. And I think we're still good morning. So can I just say I'm first time speaker at Tolpuddle. So thank you for the opportunity. And I bring solidarity to all joining us in the virtual world on Facebook from our union, the GMB. And as we connect today, it's great to know we did have a massive win this week on public sector pensions. You know, we were told that our members were living longer, so they had to work longer. We were told that our members had gold-plated pensions, so they had to pay more but get less out. We all resisted the public sector pension reforms, but we faced a united coalition government, two parties with one goal: to smash the public sector. But when the first pension valuations of the new public sector schemes showed a surplus, it revealed the lie behind the claim that our members were living longer. Under the new scheme rules, any surplus would go back to our members in improved pension benefits. But when the government saw the billions that our members had paid in, their eyes grew bigger, their mouths started to water, and they tried to squirrel it away for themselves, robbing 4.4 million workers of £2.4 billion. The GMB launched the Unpause the Pause campaign, and by building solidarity and support with our fellow unions, we jointly called for the pause to be lifted. And this week we've seen the government was made to lift that pause, and it shows what unions can achieve when they work together in solidarity. But while this means the 2.4 billion surplus should now be redistributed back to our hard-working public sector workers who earned it, the government are now saying, as Mark said, that they'll need our members' money to pay for their discrimination. You know, it's like the government think their custody over our members' earning gives them some sort of carte blanche to spend it. No doubt thinking about the lovely tax cuts they could fund for their mates, the billionaire bosses and the dodgy landlords. Well, let me say this, not on our watch. If this crisis has proven anything, it's that the workers power the economy. When workers aren't working, everything comes to a halt. All of your enterprising, your Zuckerbergs, your Bezos and Bransons, your Musks and your Trumps, they might be dreaming their little dreams, but without us, they'd be sat on their little hands, all of them without a pit to hiss in. It's the working class that have gone above and beyond during this pandemic. Our NHS staff, our care staff, retail staff, our factory workers. It's the working class that have kept our communities safe, fed and looked after. But at the same time, the levels of inequality we have seen and experienced have never been clearer. I've spent 2 decades as a union organiser. Throughout my working life, I have come to understand the structural issues and challenges facing people from a Black, Asian, minority ethnic background across our workplaces and institutions. And it has been well understood for some time now that people of a BAME heritage have been disproportionately affected. The coronavirus outbreak has exposed fundamental inequalities and institutional discrimination in the UK's economy and society. And it breaks my heart each week to hear the roll calls of the dead read out and see in each face the stark inequalities that exist in our society and communities. They said this virus doesn't discriminate, yet we know our society, our systems, our institutions, our policies and practices, and our economy do. After the death of Stephen Lawrence, post-Macpherson, we were going to build an inclusive Britain, eliminate unlawful discrimination, and make our institutions fit for purpose. You know, audits were carried out, recommendations were tabled, but many have forgotten why we had to amend the Race Relations Act back in 2000. There's been a serious breach of trust and confidence in this government. It's either the government can't or it won't protect people from all backgrounds. And we, your unions, are working together to hold this government to account. In the first days of this crisis, we were calling for a people's bailout, guarantee wages, protect people and save lives. We led the call for the publishing of the government's equality impact assessment to the pandemic. We revealed that the scope of their review into the pandemic had been intentionally narrowed to avoid dealing with the uncomfortable truths about race and class in Britain. And we told government and Michael Gove a few weeks ago straight that their response to Dr. Fenton's report was a complete and utter car crash. And the last thing we needed was more reviews that make no recommendations, no remedy, and provide no recourse to safety or justice. We are organising for a public inquiry into this titanic disaster that this government's incomprehensible actions have caused, and which they've watched over with cavalier disdain. You know, when we needed them most, it was our public sector workers showed this country their mettle. We are going to make damn sure that their sacrifice is repaid in full. And the GMB's goal for public sector workers are the same today as they were before the crisis. Our Go Public priorities are campaign for public service funding, because we need to future-proof our public services. Secondly, we need to challenge outsource and privatisation. And as others have already said, the pandemic has shone a light on what we've always known. There is no room for profit in our public services, and we demand paid justice. Just take our care workers, predominantly women, highly skilled, chronically underpaid. We demand justice for our care workers and for all our workers. And we need to celebrate the role of public service workers beyond the clapping, a solid recognition of the value of our key workers, and building public services that are fit for the future. And we can achieve this together. We can grow together. Over the past few months, we've seen a renaissance in union membership. More women are joining than ever before. We are their movement, we are your movement, we are one movement, and we are united. Solidarity.
Thank you so much, Rehana. Just a quick reminder for those watching, if you'd like to ask a question to any of our panellists, please post in the Q&A box on Zoom or in the comments if you're watching on Facebook. Thank you. And over to our last, but certainly not our final but not least speaker, Rachel Reeves, who's the MP for Leeds West and is Labour Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, which means she's Shadow Minister for the Cabinet Office and shadows the work of Michael Gove. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks very much, Mary. And I can't say what a privilege it is to be on a panel with such amazing trade union leaders. So thank you very much for inviting me here today. I think the last four speakers have all shown that if we didn't have a trade union movement today, we sure as hell would need to create one. And the work that you and your members have done during this crisis to provide the dignity, the decency and the services that we've all relied on so much. I just want to say on behalf of the Labour Party and all of our members and supporters, thank you so much for everything that you and your members have done, whether it is on prioritising health and safety, on prioritising employment rights, campaigning for proper statutory sick pay. All of those things have made a difference during this crisis, and made a difference not just to your members but to the wider community of people who work in public service and also doing all key work across the economy and society. And as others have said so eloquently, those who have been underappreciated and undervalued, that needs to change. And we can't go back, as Mark has said and as others have said, to business as usual after this crisis. I think there's much in the world of 2020 that the Tolpuddle Martyrs of 1834 would struggle to understand, but I also think there are many similarities that they would understand far too well. The union-busting firms who prioritise profits over people, the zero-hour contracts that make it so difficult for so many people to plan for the future, the migrant workers in Leicester who are paid just a few pounds an hour to produce multi-million or billion-pound profits for firms, and also those people who are sent to work, particularly in the public sector right now, not adequately protected to do their jobs that they're doing, and as Rehana and others have said, putting their lives on the line to protect all of us. All of that would be recognisable. But I think also the common decency of the British people would be recognisable to the Tolpuddle Martyrs. When we went out on our doorsteps to clap on those Thursday evenings, those are the forebears of all of us were there petitioning and campaigning and demonstrating and marching in support of the Tolpuddle Martyrs in 1834. So I think those shared traditions and also the shared values across the centuries ring out. As Mary has said, my job in the Shadow Cabinet is to shadow Michael Gove, and that gives me the privilege perhaps of shadowing possibly the least popular member of the Cabinet, especially amongst trade union members and anyone who has ever worked in a school, and being the proud daughter of two former teachers and NUT as it was members, I share that loathing. I've been trying to highlight in my role in the last 3 months or so some of the real challenges that the Cabinet Office, which I shadow, is responsible for, exposing the shortages of PPE and the failure of government to work with British businesses, manufacturers and textile companies to produce the PPE in the quantities that your members needed and were denied on the front line. Exposing the dodgy outsourcing contracts delivered to friends of the Conservative Party and their advisors. The Tory attitude, as Mark Serwotka has said, to the civil service and the extent to which the government are trying to politicise roles in the civil service. Also exposing the Brexit chaos which is unfolding around us and will become even more apparent as we move into January of next year, and also demanding that any trade deal that Britain signs protects the very highest standards of workers' rights, environmental rights, consumer rights and animal welfare standards, which the government promised, but I don't think any of us have any confidence at all that they will deliver on. Beyond that, Keir Starmer has asked me to do work on what we can learn from the coronavirus and what it will mean for the future economy and society. As he said in his speech when he was elected leader of the Labour Party, those who alert last must be first. And I think that's a philosophy that we can all sign up to. Those who have been underappreciated, underpaid and undervalued, we can't go back to that. We've learned something during this crisis. All of us on this panel already knew, but is becoming increasingly apparent, I hope even in the corridors of powers. Somebody on the panel earlier said that at the beginning of this crisis, some people said that coronavirus was the great leveller and it didn't discriminate between rich and poor, young and old, black or white. And we have seen that that is absolutely not the case. In Leeds West, where I'm an MP, there are 26 blocks of high-rise flats. Many people have no access to outdoor space. Domestic violence and sadly child neglect are on the rise in my community and in many others. And in a constituency where average earnings are already just 2/3 of the national average, nearly half of the children in my constituency are growing up in poverty. And we know that it is the people who already had the least who are suffering most during this pandemic. And the idea that this is some great leveller is just a great travesty. So let me just make a couple of short observations about valuing public sector workers. Well, first of all, public services and public sector workers cannot be the casualty of this crisis. We've seen their value, we've applauded them on Thursday nights. We can't go back to business as usual, and we certainly can't go back to the austerity that we've seen over the last 10 years. We also can't go back to a model of outsourcing. More services should be insourced and run with public values at their heart. When I chaired the Business Select Committee during the course of the last Parliament, I ran the inquiry into the collapse of Carillion. But Carillion wasn't just one bad apple in the outsourcing cart. It was systemic and endemic within the system. The CEO of Serwotka recently said that he wanted to cement the position of the private sector in the NHS. Well, that might be what he wants, but it's not what we want, and it's not what the British people want either. And we can't go back to that model. Thirdly, delivering public services is not like delivering pizza. Public services are about people. And metrics and KPIs and performance tables misses something of the essence of what public services are. The NHS isn't just a logo to sell to the highest bidder, and that must change as well. Fourth and finally, public services can help all of us and all of our communities, and perhaps the most deprived communities the most, to thrive and fulfil their potential. Cutting public services cuts the abilities of communities and individuals and families to thrive and fulfill their potential. We need greater transparency in how public services are run, and we need public services to be run in-house. Yet Tory ministers view transparency and accountability a little bit like Dracula views sunlight and garlic. We need openness, and we need public services to work together to tackle the collective challenges that we face as a society and in our communities. So to conclude, our country values its public services, and we've seen that more in the last 4 months than I think at any time within any of our lifetimes. But we need a new settlement for public services and the people who work to deliver them. We can and we must build a broad and a winning coalition together in the Labour movement, and we will do this together. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rachel, and to all of the panellists. We'll now go into Q&As. Now I'm picking these up from various streams, but it's not too late if those watching want to post more. So I suggest I give the questions in groups of 3 and we give everyone a chance to answer them, and hopefully we'll have time for a couple of rounds. So Rob from Liverpool says, how do panellists rate the chances that this government will seek to do more austerity before the parliamentary term is out? And how can we learn the lessons of the fight against austerity since 2010 to do better this time? Richard Worth says, as Rehana has said, the pandemic has shown that it's workers that run society. Without key workers, nothing would get done. As the Tories move to make us pay for the crisis by reducing terms and conditions, will unions coordinate to strike together to defend jobs, pay and pensions? And then Paul, no more information, says, can we encourage local authorities to use their commissioning policies to promote better terms and conditions for workers in care homes and domiciliary care? So I'll give you a couple of minutes, or I'll give you a moment to take those in, but shall I suggest that we go in reverse order, just to mix things up a bit? So Rachel, if you come in first, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that the question about austerity and how to fight it and learning lessons from the last 10 years. But I mean, over the last 10 years and the 3 elections that we've had since the Tories came in 2010, Labour have lost every election. So we do need to learn lessons and need to build a better narrative of how to challenge austerity. And I think that this crisis and this pandemic has really opened people's eyes to what has happened in our public services after over the last 10 years, that they've been hollowed out. And whether it's our NHS, which has fewer beds than I think at any time in its history, we've got fewer intensive care beds than almost any country in Europe, and at local authority level, there is absolutely no slack to deal with what we have experienced over the last few months. And I think it's telling that the vast majority of people do not want to go back to what we've experienced over the last 10 years. So I think we need to tell a story about this crisis and what it's shown us about the society we live in, but also link it very clearly to the decisions and policies of the Conservatives over the last 10 years in a way which, you know, we probably haven't done well enough so far if you measure success on how people vote. And as Mark said, you know, it is people in the constituencies that the Conservatives won at the most recent election that have lost most and stand to lose even more from Conservative governments, and yet they've turned away from Labour. So I think we do need to use the narrative and the lessons from this crisis to fight against austerity with everything we've got on this occasion. And there was another question that I'll just touch upon before allowing other people to come in. Without key workers, the second question said, nothing would be done. And I talk about, and have done for the last few years, the everyday economy, without which the rest of society and the economy would not be able to function. And too often people who work in the everyday economy, whether that is health and social care, supermarket workers, distribution workers, people who work in our schools, too often they have been underappreciated and undervalued. And after clapping on Thursday nights and on the anniversary the other week of the creation of the NHS, we do need to recognise the value of key workers. And you know, the Marcus Rashford campaign about and the Labour campaign about free school meals. You know, there are some football players who have done amazing things during this crisis to put issues on the table. But the inequalities of wages that we see in our society don't match up at all with how we value what different people produce and give back. And we do need a reckoning and a reconciliation that people who work hard, who go out every day and deliver the services upon which all of us depend and all of our lives, as it happens, depend on, should be paid more than they're paid today. And that we must ensure that we learn the lesson of this crisis on that as well.
Shall I come in next, Mary? I just want to respond to all those 3 questions collectively if I can, and Rachel's already picked up some of the stuff that I was going to say, so I'm not going to repeat that. But what I will say is this, is unions have never been more relevant. The pandemic has given us an opportunity to work in solidarity. I mean, I've seen the best of us in this pandemic against what has been the most difficult of circumstances. So that's the first thing. And we have to shift the balance of power in favour of workers. And the only way we're going to do it, and we've all said it today, is we have to build proper workplace organisation. You know, we have to recruit the next generation of union leaders. We know we need to do that. And the only way we're going to do that if we work collectively together. And the point that I was going to make is this: once we shift the balance of power, and if that means we have to consider industrial action, so be it. But at the moment, and this is just a brutal reality, only half of public sector workers are in a union, and then you take that into the private sector and even less workers are in a trade union. And there's phenomenal, brilliant work. You know, I look at the work that all the trade unions are doing around the gig economy, about organising disparate groups of workers. And that applies to domiciliary care. I mean, domiciliary care union organisation is so poor, it's about 5%. Now, that isn't because the unions are not trying to organise domiciliary care workers, it's because they are the gig economy in public services. They are on 0-hour contracts, they are contracted to earn 15 minutes of salary at a time. So we do need to make a stronger case to local authorities, and we do need to sit down with those commissioners, and we do need to map out a better deal for care workers. And the GMB, and I know others are already of that view, as is the Labour Party, is we need a national care service, and we need to take profit out of the care sector. But none of that's going to be possible unless we work in solidarity even more. And I take heart from the fact that there is a renaissance of the trade union movement. More women are in work, more women are joining since 1995. That's a credit to the work of the people on this panel and beyond. So let's just keep building that solidarity and our union membership, and that's the only way we're going to deliver for our members.
So just on the three questions, just very briefly, on austerity, I think what it requires is going to be very bold political opposition, and it's going to require a bold trade union movement. And I think we have to be clear that people with the least cannot pay the price. And I think that requires issues of how we suggest it's paid for. And certainly I think we shouldn't be shying away from ensuring those who have a lot should be asked to pay more. But certainly those with the least cannot afford to pay. So I think it requires certainly that political opposition. And for the trade unions, I think we have to be honest amongst ourselves that we've done a lot of good work, but over the last period of fighting austerity, we got a lot wrong. And I think we have to therefore learn two lessons for me, and one of them answers the questions directly. Where we all face a common assault at the same time, we must do more to try to have a common response. There's no question back in 2010-11, when 29 unions took industrial action on the question of pensions, it was the first time in years the trade unions were on the front page of the newspapers, were being talked about by people a length and breadth of the country. And we showed by uniting all of our members our potential strength. So I think if they come with a public sector pay freeze or seek to make us pay on pensions, we need to do more, I think, to try to work together. But the other thing I think we have to recognize is that the unions also, I think, and I'm going to speak openly about my own, the thing that we need more than anything across our movement, I think, is a participation revolution in our unions. What we need is our members being active in our unions, more of them getting involved and more of them participating. The anti-union laws are a disgrace, they're undemocratic, but they set us a huge challenge, and you have to get more than half people voting in ballots. And with notable exceptions, you know, like the CWU, we know how hard that is in big unions under postal balloting. And therefore, we have to turn to get people to recognise the union is the members, and we want those members involved. And in this crisis, we have seen some real opportunities. I'm for collectivism, and I always will be in favour of meetings. But when suddenly we recognise that we've all spent years spending 5 hours on a train to go and do a meeting of 30 people, I now do a Zoom call with some people on this panel and others, and there's been 20,000 people watching. You're directly able to communicate with workers, and we've got to therefore make it easier, I think, for people to get involved, have their voice heard, because that is the way that we will be able to mobilise, I think, when we need to. And finally, just on the question of local authorities, you know, it's not a union, it's not the area we organise in, but I do know one thing: if we all agree that workers shouldn't pay the price, it must mean that the leaders of our political institutions, including councils, whoever is running those councils, if the answer to the problem is to attack the terms and conditions of your own workforce, then I think you're answering the wrong question. And I think, therefore, that it must be right, whether you work for a council, NHS, for schools or the civil service, we shouldn't be paying the price. And that's why I think the answer is political, but it is also, it is uniting our movement. And I've just finished by saying, with all our speakers, I'm very optimistic, because I actually do see people joining us. but we've got to turn that optimism now into getting people active and involved in all of our communities. And I think if we do that, we can rise to the challenge.
Thanks very much, Mary. Do you want me to take the baton?
Yes, please do, thanks.
So, so picking up where Mark left off, let's just be absolutely crystal clear. My union, Unite, and I believe other unions involved today, demand really, I was going to say call upon, but we demand that all councils, irrespective of their political allegiance or majority, treat their workforce with respect and dignity, and we don't have a pecking order of where we defend our members. We defend our members wherever our members are facing unjustified attacks that we deem not to be fair. The social care business model is broken, let's be clear. Social care organisations are going bust. It's a broken business model because it isn't a business. And we think we bring it in-house and utilise what is an immeasurable profit, and that is the efficiency of public service and dedication to public service. It can't be measured. There aren't people that line their pockets with it, but it's what's kept us going through this pandemic in all the services that we have needed. At the beginning, I talked about three priorities, and I think, you know, answering the questions is around cohesion between those three priorities. So I said that I think we have to build on public appreciation. Our members are the public. They're joining the union, but they're also the public. And they appreciated the services and the service workers. So we need to marry that appreciation with trade union membership. And I agree, we have to have the courage to be bold. I suggested a second priority is to resist austerity. Well, we won't do it by asking nicely always. I think probably that's what we've learned. And we need to find different ways to organise members. It's fine and dandy having a demonstration. It's a long time on a coach and it makes you feel good, but actually the fight back's in the workplace. And I agree with Rehana that we, you know, it's not one or the other, but our challenge is to build our density in our workplaces and lead people, find leadership within those workplaces. It is there. Every survey we ask, would you be willing to take on the role of a rep? And we are always responded to positively. So let's build that cohort of new activists and do as Mark suggests, not require people to travel hours for a meeting that looks at the minutes of the last meeting and prevaricates, but actually harnesses the energy and utilises it to win for our class. You know, finally, Mary, a great woman called Angela Davis wrote a book which I would urge you all to read, which is called Women, Race and Class. And it sets out perfectly the challenges that today, in the face of this pandemic, we all still face. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gail. Christina, for the final word, because we've got about a minute and a half left. You're still on mute, Christina.
Very briefly, just to say, yeah, I spoke on Thursday. We're in strike at the moment. UNISON members are in strike in Terre Hamlets at the moment against precisely that. The council is doing a huge dismiss and re-engage. I spoke at the strike rally on Thursday, and you know, we've done a lot of work to try and make sure that we can take industrial action across loads of our services, and we've proven we can do it at national level in some sectors. It's more difficult now than it was in 2010, 2011, but I think there's definitely work to be done there. Just very briefly on the whole commissioning question, you know, we've been pushing throughout this pandemic to try and make sure, and we've gone directly to work with commissioners to get them to pay full pay when care workers are off sick. And we've had great successes in a number of areas. The whole problem is we need to get rid of the whole commissioning model. It doesn't save money, it's not effective, it's inefficient, and we need a complete change in the way we think about how public services are delivered. Sorry, I'm going to run out of time, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Fantastic. Sadly, we don't have any time for any more questions, but it's been a really great session. So I just want to say thanks again to all of our speakers. Thanks to everyone who's joined us to watch on Zoom and on Facebook. Keep up the good work and solidarity.